The city never stopped moving. Shoes clicked across the pavement, horns blared, steam rose from sewer grates. But no one noticed the man slumped against the wall of the old Dayton building, a faded green tarp pulled over his knees, a coffee-stained paper cup at his side with exactly 47 cents inside. They called him Patch. No one knew his real name. Some thought he was a vet. Others said he used to be a professor. Most just didn't care. They stepped over him every morning, some muttering apologies, others pretending not to see him at all. But Patch watched them. Every pair of polished shoes, every building entrance code, every scaffolding that went up and came down. He noticed patterns. How rent signs went up one day and came down the next. He saw the suits whispering in front of the Heritage Trust Bank. He saw city inspectors measuring the curb outside the historic courthouse. And beneath his tarp, he held a black leather tube, cracked at the edges, sealed with a brass cap. Inside it, a map. And not just any map. It was a city grid, dated 1953, annotated in red ink. Deeds, easements, rights of way, ownership. Patch never showed it. Not until the man in the navy coat tried to drag him off the sidewalk. "You can't sleep here," the man snapped. Patch didn't speak. He just reached into the tarp, pulled the leather tube into view, and slowly opened it. The man squinted. "What's that, a drawing?" "No," Patch whispered for the first time in weeks. "It's the truth." The man in the navy coat laughed. "You've got a piece of trash paper, old man." Patch's hand didn't tremble. He laid the map flat against the concrete. The edges curled slightly from decades of being sealed. "Block 7, he said, pointing. "I don't care what block it is. This is a business district. You have no claim here." Patch lifted a second sheet, an original title deed, stamped and signed by the Dayton family. "You see this name? Edward Lemuel Harroway. That's my grandfather." The man paused. "That's impossible. This building's owned by a holding company." Patch looked up, eyes crystal clear under a shock of gray curls. "And who do you think sold it to them?" The man stepped back. An hour later, 2 city inspectors stood over the map. One was silent. The other, a junior official with a clipboard, kept shaking his head. "This can't be real. The original property documents were thought to be destroyed in the '78 fire." Patch simply nodded. "They weren't. My mother kept them, in a box, under her piano. Said one day, you'll need to remind the world who we are." "And you're just, what, proving this now?" Patch didn't blink. "Because now they're tearing down the courthouse. My family built it." That evening, an emergency stop order was issued for all demolition permits within Old Quarter South. The press hadn't heard yet, but they would. They called him homeless, vagrant, deranged, but they never called him by name, because Patch hadn't used it in decades. His full name? Thomas Edward Harroway IV. Born in 1951, raised in a 4-story brownstone on Mercer Street. His father died in a fire when he was 12. His mother taught piano, then cleaned offices. But she never sold the papers. "You hold on to dignity," she'd whisper, "even when the world pretends you don't exist." He studied history, loved it, until the recession ate up the last of their funds. The house was lost, the documents hidden in a violin case. He bounced between night jobs, shelters, eventually sleeping wherever shadows were long enough to cover his body. But he never forgot the smell of the old courthouse wood, the mosaic in the Dayton building's lobby, the signature his grandfather carved into the stone of Block 11's foundation. Now, with one map, he'd forced the city to remember him. The next day, a local journalist named Rhea Kaplan arrived with a photographer. She crouched beside him, soft voice, curious eyes. "Is it true?" she asked. "You own this?" Patch looked at the skyline. "No one owns a city, but we build it, brick by brick, memory by memory, and no one has the right to erase that." She blinked. Then she took the first photo. It would appear the next morning, front page. The man who stopped the wrecking ball. And beneath it, for the first time in half a century, his name. Thomas E. Harroway. The newspaper hit stands at 6 a.m. By 6:12, a copy was on the mayor's desk. By 6:20, a team of lawyers were flipping through land registry archives, panicked and sweating. And by 6:45, Thomas Harroway was being offered coffee by the very guards who'd once shooed him away from City Hall's front steps. Rhea Kaplan's article had gone viral. The man who stopped the wrecking ball was more than a headline. It was a reckoning. TV crews followed. Drone shots zoomed in on the tarp-covered sidewalk. Reporters scrambled to piece together his lineage. The Harroway name resurfaced like a shipwreck, forgotten but unmistakably real. Some questioned the document's authenticity, but city records began to validate his claims, slowly, painfully, undeniably. By noon, a press conference was announced. Patch didn't speak much, just stood next to Rhea, map in hand, holding it high. And when asked what he wanted, he simply said, recognition, protection, and to make sure no more history gets erased while no one's looking. That night, a box appeared beside Patch's resting place. Inside, letters, dozens of them, from strangers. One was from a woman who'd passed him every morning for 9 years. "I thought you were just part of the sidewalk," she wrote. "Now I realize you were holding up the city." Another was from a third-grade classroom. Each student had drawn a building they thought he might have owned. And one came from a man named Clark Reddick, a former city planner. He wrote, "We knew about the Harroway titles, but when the records burned in '78, we assumed the story had ended. I'm glad you didn't." Patch read each one under the yellow glow of a street lamp. His fingers trembled not from cold, but from memory. He wasn't just a footnote anymore. He was a chapter. It took 10 days for the first legal challenge. A real estate firm, Valmore Holdings, filed suit claiming adverse possession and fraudulent interruption of zoning continuity. The words meant little to Patch, but his lawyer, Rhea's cousin Elias Kaplan, understood everything. "He's trying to scare you," Elias said, "to bury you in paperwork until you give up." Patch didn't flinch. "We don't bury history, we restore it." The court date was set. The courtroom was packed. Cameras, journalists, law students, even city officials. Patch wore a donated blazer, still slept outside, still sipped coffee from a cracked thermos. But now he stood behind a microphone. He opened with a simple sentence. "My name is Thomas Edward Harroway IV." And then he told the story of maps, of deeds, of being forgotten, of watching his family's legacy erased one building at a time. When he finished, there was silence, not a single breath, and then applause. The judge had to bang the gavel twice. Outside, people chanted his name. Patch, Harroway, Thomas, all the same man. And finally, scene. 2 weeks later, something strange happened. A group of architecture students erected a small wooden model outside the old courthouse. It resembled the original Harroway design: arched windows, stone facade, copper roof. Beneath it, a plaque to the unseen architects. The city began to shift. Tours included stops at Harroway sites. A podcast dedicated an episode to The Man with the Map. An urban historian began a project mapping every building touched by Patch's family. He never asked for any of it. He just stood beside the model every morning, watching people read the plaque. And once, he whispered to no one in particular, "She would have liked this. Mama would have liked this." It was the first time he smiled in public. But not everyone was pleased. Developers, losing millions in delayed projects, blamed the Harroway chaos. On a rainy Thursday, Patch arrived at his spot to find bulldozers idling across the street. Crews claimed they had a revised permit. Patch sat down in front of the tires, alone, until Rhea arrived, then Elias, then 5 students, then 30. By noon, the entire sidewalk was blocked with people holding signs. "History matters, cities remember. Protect Patch." The mayor was forced to issue a statement. "Until the legal ownership of these zones is thoroughly reviewed and resolved, all construction in historic Harroway regions will be suspended." That night, Patch didn't sleep on the ground. A retired judge offered him her guest room. He politely declined, but she left the light on anyway. The envelope arrived in gold foil, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "Dear Mr. Harroway, I was one of the ones who erased your name. In 1980, I signed the zoning order that began the sale of your family's lands. I knew what I was doing. I thought it was progress. It wasn't. It was theft. I am sorry. I am dying now. This letter will outlive me. But I needed you to know, we see you now, and we're trying to be better." There was no signature. Patch read it 4 times, then folded it once and placed it inside the map tube. The basement of the Dayton Library had not been opened in over 20 years. Dust coated everything. The lights buzzed with a tired hum. But Patch Thomas stood at the threshold, keys in hand, flanked by 2 archivists and a city historian. After the court ruling, after the mayor's reluctant handshake, after the documentary deal was declined with a simple, "This isn't entertainment," Thomas asked for just one thing: access to the city's sealed archives. Inside were boxes, hundreds, stacked and yellowing, forgotten contracts, photographs, deeds, correspondence between long-dead families and developers, paper trails no one had followed. He opened one marked Parcel B17. Inside, a photograph of his grandfather standing beside a steel frame in 1932, smiling beneath a dusty cap. And behind him, the earliest foundation of the building Patch had slept against for a decade. "I knew it," Thomas whispered. The archivist beside him leaned in. "You've just rewritten city history." Thomas nodded. "No, I just remembered it." The fire began at 2:43 a.m. A Molotov cocktail through a side window of the courthouse. Flames licking wood that had stood for over a century. Arson, confirmed. Motivated by anger at delays, at heritage claims, at one man holding back progress. Thomas was unharmed. He wasn't there. But when he arrived the next morning, the smoke was still in the air. Ash clung to the air like ghosts. He did not cry. Instead, he stepped toward the yellow tape, past the officer without a word, and stood in front of the charred door. By noon, a crowd had gathered. By evening, candles lined the steps. And by midnight, the protest began, not in anger, but in silence. Hundreds sitting in the cold, unmoving. Some held signs. Most just sat, eyes forward, facing what remained of the courthouse. Rhea brought him a chair. He refused. He stood. All night. And in the morning, when a city official asked what he wanted, he simply said, "Rebuild it. Not for me, for the ones who come after." 3 months later, construction began. The new courthouse would retain the old archways. The facade would be rebuilt stone by stone, using salvaged material from the rubble. A small museum would be added inside, dedicated to the Harroway family and forgotten builders of the city. Thomas declined to speak at the groundbreaking. Instead, he handed a single brick to the mayor. "This," he said quietly, "was from the foundation my grandfather laid. Put it back where it belongs." The mayor, for once, did not make a speech. He just took the brick and nodded. Thomas didn't stay for the ceremony. He walked 2 blocks away, sat at his usual corner, and took out the map. But this time, he wasn't alone. Children came by to ask questions. Architecture students brought him sketches. Elderly residents shared stories that matched the ones in his head. And in time, a bronze plaque was placed on the wall behind him. Thomas Edward Harroway IV, guardian of memory. He lived quietly, read letters, watched the city change, not through force, not through money, but through remembrance. And when he passed 6 years later, the city didn't mourn. It remembered, and that made all the difference.